Good afternoon. And yes, it is the afternoon. And I hope you guys are sitting comfortably because I haven't made an opinion video for a few weeks now. And I've been mulling over a lot of things. There's been a lot of stories coming out. And I've been thinking about stuff relating to AAA gaming and the way in which games are monetized and all the rest of it. And while I was in the process of trying to come up with a video, had three ideas that seemed to coalesce and become part of one bigger idea. And the three things that I'm thinking of relate to why I think AAA gaming is in a really bad place at the moment, and why I think that AAA games are, on the whole, pretty shit. And the three things I was thinking of are the death of the single player, the obsession with content, and the obsession with money. And I think they all dovetail into each other and are all part of the same problem in effect. But let's talk about the death of the single player first, because we're being told that nobody wants to play single player games anymore. We're told constantly by EA and others. And, you know, there used to be games like Call of Duty that had brilliant single player elements. And, you know, they were mainly single player games. But over time, they morphed into primarily online games until eventually we got to the point where we are now, where Call of Duty this year hasn't got a single player element at all. After years of Activision actively running down that element to the point where we're looking at it and calling it shit. And so they ditch it because they're saying we don't want to play it. But the reason we don't want to play it is because they've made it shit. They've taken their eye off the ball. And I even made a video looking at FIFA and saying how I thought monetization had made them take their eye off the metaphorical ball, if you like, and made them focus on the monetization elements to the detriment of the single player aspects. But is it true? Is it true that the single player element of games is something we're not interested in anymore? Well, that's not the case for me. I'm still interested in single player games, and I'd like for these companies like EA and Activision to explain to me, if single player games are no longer of any interest, why Horizon Zero Dawn, God of War, Spider-Man and RPGs like Octopath Traveler are still extremely popular. Is it just shooters that we don't want single player experiences in? Has that become the case now? Is it true that people who play COD don't want to play the single player element? Or is it the case of what I said before, that the single player element has been run down to the point where people go and buy the game now, and a lot of youngsters never knew a time when there was a decent single player element? And, you know, if you look back, shooters were primarily single player. Doom, Quake, Halo, Half-Life, even the original Far Cry was pretty much a linear single-player experience. And I know you could approach the missions in different ways, but it was basically on rails, especially when you got onto consoles. The PC experience was a little bit different. But what about linear? You know, Jim Sterling's talked about this, and I agree with him. There's nothing wrong with linear games per se. The fact is that many games would, in my view at least, be better if they had stuck to a linear format. Look at Ghost Recon Wildlands. Okay, I know some of you out there probably really enjoy Ghost Recon Wildlands, but is it actually a better game for the fact that they've made it open world? Or would it have been better if it had been more focused? Would it have been better if it had had a stronger story and we could have followed it through? Like something like Wolfenstein. You know, the most recent Wolfenstein games are great. And I would argue that because they haven't taken their eye off the ball to look at the multiplayer aspects, the single player aspects were better. But why is there this obsession with having these massive open world games that are chock full of content? Quantity over quality. They take this content and they carve it up and then they sell it to us piecemeal. Is this improving things? Is taking a game that could have been linear, making it open world, having lots and lots of rinse and repeat missions that they can then break up and sell to us, is that making the games better? And I would argue not. This obsession with content, this obsession that bigger is better, is that actually true? If you look at something like books, take Jackie Collins, or years ago, L. Ron Hubbard. I don't know if you know L. Ron Hubbard. He famously started Scientology, but he wrote a sequence of 10 books, each of them massive tomes. And those books were, well, I read some of them and they weren't all that great, to be honest. They were padded, nonsensical junk, basically. But are Jackie Collins books better than Philip K. Dick's Man in the High Castle or Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Are they better than 1984? Are they? Would you rather have a book that you can use as a doorstop, or would you rather have a book that is absolutely chock full of interesting elements? Do you want lots of padding, or do you want something that is focused? The way I look at it is that only in games do we hear fans and critics singing the praises of the product because it goes on and on and on and on for hour after hour. Content can be good, but only if there's quality as well as quantity. And even then you can have too much of a good thing. How many massive RPGs have you actually finished? Even good ones. Come on, be honest. How many people do you know who finish these big games? How many of these massive games do you finish in a year? Wouldn't it be better to have a shorter game that you are actually able to finish without grinding for months on end? Wouldn't you rather have a decent story that lasted for 5 hours than a shit one that was padded with content, most of which looks exactly like the other content, and that went, as I say, on and on? If you take a game like, I don't know, What Remains of Edith Finch, it's one of the best games to have come out in the last few years. That's my opinion. Don't know why I have to state that, but, you know, people will be saying, no, it's not. It's my opinion. All right, we're done with that. Let's move on. Every part of What Remains of Edith Finch is lovingly crafted by people who obviously knew what they were doing and, perhaps more importantly, cared about what they were creating. The game lasts, I don't know, 5-10 hours depending on your play style, and every single moment is memorable. Surely you'd rather be playing that than clearing out yet another base with yet more generic foes in yet more generic locations that, you know, you take an age to get to, all the while being distracted by yet more generic foes in yet more generic locations as you move from one to the other. And yes, I know I'm overemphasizing the point a bit, you know, because some open world games are very good. But they're increasingly the exception rather than the rule, because developers, publishers, and even the gaming press has convinced us that bigger is better no matter what. Content is everything to so many people out there. Honestly, the next time I hear a reviewer drone on about content, I think I'm going to destroy something. We have to ask the question as to why the industry thinks it's so much better to focus on content. And I think there's a good reason for that. I think the reason they're focusing on content is something I already touched on a little bit earlier. And that is, if you focus on content, you can break up that content and you can sell it to gamers. And that's the third point. If you can sell these things to gamers, you can make money. And that's where this all comes from. The obsession with money. Season passes, map packs, pay to win, DLC, loot boxes, which, okay, I know loot boxes are a subset of DLC. The fact is it goes on and on. And any area that they can monetize, they will try to monetize. And if there's an area that they haven't monetized yet, you can bet your bottom dollar that they're going to. There will be some way that companies like EA, Activision, and Ubisoft will come up with ways of making money. We've seen just in the last few weeks, Activision have hit an all-time low with COD's $1 reticule, which will cost you more than $1 because $3 is actually the minimum spend. So there we are. And we thought Activision and Bobby Kotick couldn't sink any lower. Oh, and look, before anybody starts that games cost so much more to make now and these companies have to make money somehow, let me just remind you of something. Bobby Kotick, the CEO of Blizzard Activision, has an estimated net worth of $7 billion. And he has around 175 million shares in the company. Think about that for a moment. Yeah? You thought about it? Okay, now answer me this. Just how much money does someone need? If it's so impossible to make good games without excessive monetization, explain how Horizon Zero Dawn, Spider-Man, God of War and others managed to do it. I know I've mentioned this already, but it seems pertinent again. Look, Nintendo have even managed to produce an old-school classic in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, and I'm pretty certain they've made money from the game. Can you imagine what it would have looked like if Nintendo had decided to carve the game up into little pieces and flog bits of it to us in loot boxes? They could have made a fortune, but the game would have been a mess. Instead, they allowed us to open characters up by playing the game. This is how it always used to be, and it's how it should be now. But instead, these huge corporations carve up their IPs in the never-ending search for ever more revenue. And some gamers, and more importantly the gaming press, which seems to consist increasingly of paid-up shills and gaming illiterates with little or no knowledge of gaming history, defend this bullshit. This is the very definition of defending the indefensible. How can you claim that games cost more to make and the industry needs more monetization when the companies making those games continue to grow bigger and their CEOs get fatter? Because that is what has been happening. Until now. Because there are signs that the tide is turning. That finally the sleeping giant of gaming has awoken and that gamers have finally had enough of being taken for lethargic sheep who enjoy being fleeced. Sales of FIFA, COD, Battlefield and others are down, and shares in EA, Activision, Ubisoft and others have taken a nosedive off a cliff. Now, look, we have to be really careful about making too much of this because shares in many tech companies, including Microsoft, Google, Sony and others, are also down. So this could just be part of a trend and the share prices could very well recover, and they probably will. But Activision and EA in particular have taken a much bigger hit than the rest of the industry, and while we can't be certain of the reason, I like to think it's because of the fall in sales and the backlash against the increasingly aggressive monetization these companies are employing in an attempt to turn the gaming industry into little more than an enormous and lucrative snake oil scheme that increasingly offers less and less for more and more money. And the irony is that as these companies see a decline in growth, sales and profits, they'll almost certainly double down on their aggressive monetization schemes in an attempt to keep printing money. And that in turn will drive away even more gamers and put even more pressure on the Koticks and the Wilsons of this world. It could very well become a cycle of failure, because these guys simply don't understand the industry they are in or the customers they are dealing with. They are businessmen, and they are not at all interested in the art of games, the skill of the people making them, or the passion of those who love their hobby. They're like blind idiots selling paintings because they are making a profit, and they have no understanding of how interest might wane if the paintings are no longer of a high standard. Of course, that's what might happen. The alternative, it doesn't really bear thinking about. It's that the industry adapts and finds more ways to fleece us while placating enough of us to keep us spending money. It's what's happened before. And if that happens, then, well, as far as I see it, we're lost. Because EA and Activision and their ilk will just see the latest share price drop as a blip and continue on blithely thinking up ways to screw even more money out of their unsuspecting customers. Many of whom are, well, too young to even remember when the likes of Super Smash Bros. Was the norm rather than the outlier. However this pans out though, AAA gaming is all but dead to me, personally. I've already stopped buying many of the franchises I used to love, with FIFA, Battlefield, COD and other games no longer being of interest to me because I want to play the game rather than spend my time trying to work out what else I need to buy in order to get the full experience. That's where we are now. You know, if you're interested in these games, you can spend all your time worrying about what to buy in order to play the game fully, or you can just shell out as much money as you can find and just not think about it. And that might be easier to do, but it's not very easy on your wallet. As I say, there are exceptions, and Sony should be singled out for praise in this area, not just for putting out great exclusives, but for putting out great exclusives with fair monetization. And that's the key word here, fair. But money talks. And if EA, Activision and others bounce back and incorporate even more money-spinning cons into their products, I can't actually bring myself to call them games, then sooner or later Sony, Nintendo and others will see the dollar signs and follow suit. Because they're businesses. And, you know, if you look at Sony and you look at Nintendo, I'm praising them here, but they make a lot of decisions about money a lot of the time too. And they could easily go down this route. At which point, I'm giving up on games altogether and going back to reading books and watching films. And I think I've said this before, but it's true. I'll leave gaming to the kids who think paying £600 on cosmetic items is the norm and who are too stupid or too ignorant to know any better. But that's what I think about it. What do you think? As usual, come and let me know in the comments and we can have a chat about it. Do you think the single player is dying? Do you think there's an over-emphasis on content over quality? And do you think this obsession with money is ultimately leading to the other two and killing off games? You may completely disagree, and you're quite entitled to disagree, and come and let me know. And we can discuss it and maybe argue about it, I don't know. But whatever you do, try and subscribe to the channel because I'm always putting out videos like this and help videos and other stuff. So yeah, I'm sure you'll find something you're interested in. And in the meantime, I'm going to bugger off and grab myself a cup of tea and then I'm off to pick up my kid. So I'll speak to you in the next one. Sorry this one's a bit of a downer. Hopefully the next one will be a bit more uplifting. Bye.